The world of the Ice Age was a place of extremes, a land where nature itself seemed hostile to human life. Vast glaciers stretched endlessly across the horizon, glistening like frozen mountains that swallowed valleys whole. The air was sharp, cutting against the skin like knives, while winds howled to frozen plains with a sound that resembled the cries of unseen spirits. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, burying the earth beneath a white silence that concealed both promise and danger. For the people of this time, our prehistoric ancestors, winter was not simply a season. It was the greatest trial they would ever face. The story begins not with comfort, but with fear. Imagine a small band of humans huddled together in the darkness of a cave. Their breath hangs in the air as mist, their bodies wrapped in animal hides, their only protection against the killing cold outside. The faint glow of firelight dances on the walls, illuminating faces filled with both exhaustion and determination. For them, every spark of fire is a lifeline, every meal a miracle, every day a struggle to survive one more night. To live through an Ice Age winter was to balance constantly between survival and extinction. It is important to understand that the Ice Age shaped humanity in ways no warm climate could. The environment was unforgiving, demanding innovation and resilience. Where food once grew freely in warmer months, the land now lay barren beneath layers of snow. Rivers and lakes froze solid, denying easy access to water. The great herds of animals, once plentiful and easy to track, migrated south or perished in the cold. This was the reality our ancestors faced, and it forced them to change, to adapt or to die. The endless winter was a test, and those who survived carried within the lessons that would echo across human history. This opening moment introduces not just a scene, but a question. What drove these people, fragile and vulnerable compared to the beasts of their time, to keep moving, to keep fighting? Why did they choose to risk everything, abandoning the security of their caves, their familiar hunting grounds, and their ancestral places, in order to journey hundreds of miles into the unknown? The answer lies in the delicate balance of fear and necessity. To remain in one place was to invite death by starvation, by cold, or by predators. To move was to risk the unknown, yet also offer the faint promise of life. The harsh beauty of this world must be imagined in its full weight. The ground was hard and unyielding, often covered in ice, so thick that even digging for roots was impossible. Storms came without warning, lasting for days, leaving entire groups trapped inside caves or shelters with dwindling supplies. Nights stretched longer than days, filled with an overwhelming darkness pierced only by the fragile flicker of flames. Outside that circle of light, wolves prowled, lions roared, and hyenas waited for weakness to expose itself. To fall asleep too far from the fire was to invite death. Yet despite this crushing fear, these early humans endured, their spirit unbroken by the endless winter surrounding them. This opening narration also draws attention to the fragility of their existence. Unlike the massive mammoths that could withstand the cold with thick layers of fat and fur, or the reindeer that migrated to distant pastures, humans had only their intelligence and their will. Their bodies were weak compared to predators, their skin bare against the biting cold. Yet, it was precisely this vulnerability that drove them to innovate, creating clothing, building shelters, and learning to harness fire. Each act of survival became not only a necessity, but also a spark of progress, pushing humanity forward through hardship. The endless winter was more than just a backdrop. It was a constant adversary. It shaped how cavemen thought, how they moved, and how they lived. The environment dictated the rhythm of their lives. When to hunt, when to travel, when to seek shelter. The world was alive with danger, but it was also alive with lessons, teaching them that survival required unity, courage, and the strength to abandon the known for the uncertain. And so, as the Ice Age tightened its grip year after year, tribes learned to anticipate its arrival. They felt the pressure of time each autumn, knowing that with the first frost began a race against death. The cold was not patient. It swallowed the world swiftly, forcing choices no one wanted to make. Stay and risk being buried beneath snow and hunger, or leave, embarking on journeys that span hundreds of miles across hostile landscapes. The opening of this story, therefore, is not just about cold. It is about movement, about the human instinct to push forward even when the path ahead seems impossible. The endless winter is both the stage and the antagonist of this documentary. It is the force that stripped the weak away and sharpened the strong. It was winter that demanded cooperation within tribes, winter that inspired fire-making and shelter-building, and winter that forced migration into lands unknown. To survive this season was not only to defeat nature's cruelty, but to affirm humanity's place in a world that seemed determined to erase them. It is here, in this struggle against the cold, that we see the true beginnings of human endurance, resilience, and a relentless will to live. Before the deadly grip of winter tightened across the land, there was a time of abundance, a brief period when the world offered gifts freely. Spring and summer were the seasons of hope, when the earth revealed its richness and humans could live with relative ease. Rivers ran wide and clear, carrying fish in their currents. Grasslands stretched endlessly, dotted with grazing herds of bison, reindeer, and wild horses. Forests swelled with berries, nuts, and edible plants. For a short while, the cavemen's existence seemed less like a struggle and more like a partnership with nature. It was during these warmer months that tribes built their strength, gathered supplies, and prepared for the inevitable return of the cold. Imagine waking in the early morning of a late spring day, the air crisp but not biting, the sun casting soft light across green valleys. Children would emerge from shelters or caves, running freely, their laughter echoing across the land. Hunters would rise, carrying stone-tipped spears and bows, ready to track the movements of deer along the ridges. Women gathered plants and fruits, their hands skilled in identifying which roots were edible and which could be stored for months. In these moments, life had a rhythm, one that felt natural and sustaining. It was a rhythm that promised survival, if only the people could store enough of it away before the frost arrived. But this ease was deceptive, a calm before the storm. For every berry collected, there was a question. Would it last through the dark months ahead? For every animal killed, there was a calculation. How much meat could be preserved? How much fat could be stored? How long would it keep the group alive? Even in the midst of warmth, the shadow of winter loomed. Cavemen did not live in ignorance of what was coming. They lived with constant awareness. The seasons were not a cycle of comfort, but a countdown to hardship. Summer was also a time of building. Tools were sharpened, new weapons crafted, and shelters repaired. Firewood was gathered, dried, and stacked in preparation. Clothing made from animal hides was stitched together with sinew, reinforced with bone needles, and sometimes decorated with beads or ochre as a reminder of life beyond survival. The work of summer was not only about the present. It was about ensuring the tribe had every possible advantage when the snow fell. Those who neglected this preparation often faced disaster when winter arrived unprepared. The abundance of summer also shaped social life. With food relatively plentiful, tribes could afford moments of leisure and ritual. They gathered around fires not just for warmth but for storytelling, sharing knowledge across generations. Elders recounted tales of migrations past, of hunts both successful and tragic, of winters survived and winters that claimed too many lives. These stories were not merely entertainment. They were lessons encoded in memory, warnings to the young about the importance of preparation. Summer also created opportunities for encounters with other tribes. Migrations often overlapped during these months, when groups followed herds or gathered in fertile areas. Sometimes these meetings were peaceful, marked by trade. Flint for hides, obsidian for meat, shells for tools. At other times, they erupted into conflict, when resources were contested or when old rivalries resurfaced. In this way, summer was not only a season of abundance but also of tension, where the seeds of future alliances and rivalries were sown. The land itself was a teacher during these warmer months. Cavemen observed the behaviors of animals closely, for they were guides to survival. The fattening of deer signaled the approach of winter. The migration of birds revealed the direction of warmer lands. Even the blooming of certain plants served as reminders of the limited time left before frost returned. Every detail mattered. Every observation was stored in memory, because forgetting could mean death when the cold season began. Yet despite this knowledge, there were always groups who chose to remain in their comfort, lulled into a false sense of security by the abundance around them. For them, the urgency to prepare felt distant, almost unreal. They lived for the present, enjoying the warmth of the sun, the taste of fresh meat, the safety of plentiful game. But Winter punished such complacency harshly. Archaeological evidence suggests entire groups perished because they failed to prepare, their remains left in caves surrounded by empty storage pits and unfinished tools. The lesson was clear. Comfort was a trap, and only vigilance ensured survival. In many ways, summer was a season of contrasts. On the surface, it offered joy, freedom, and plenty. Beneath it, however, was an undercurrent of fear, an awareness that this abundance was fleeting. Cavemen lived with both emotions, gratitude for the moment and dread for the future. This duality shaped their psychology, forcing them to exist in two worlds at once, one of sunshine and laughter and one of shadows and ice. As the days began to shorten, tribes would slowly shift their focus from gathering and celebration to migration and preparation. Fires burned longer into the night, drying strips of meat that would be stored for weeks to come. Hides were cured and stacked, ready to be used as cloaks and blankets. Stone tools were tested for sharpness, ensuring they could pierce the hides of great beasts in the hunts ahead. These final acts of summer were filled with urgency, as if every tribe could feel the cold approaching with each passing sunset. Summer was not merely a backdrop to the story of survival. It was a foundation. It provided the raw materials, the lessons, and the strength needed to endure what lay ahead. But it was also a reminder of the fragility of existence. The warmth would fade, the rivers would freeze, the grasslands would vanish beneath snow, and only those who were prepared well enough thought ahead, and acted with courage would survive the long, merciless winter. As the warmth of summer faded into memory, the world began to whisper warnings that only the observant could hear. The first frost was not sudden, not a brutal storm crashing down upon the earth, but rather a series of subtle signs. Cavemen, though lacking calendars or written records, were deeply attuned to these shifts. They watched the skies, the animals, the rivers, and the plants, for each carried within them a message about the coming cold. The first chill in the air, the shortening of days, the departure of birds, these were not random events. They were nature's alarm bells, signaling that time was running out. The earliest indication was often a breath of cold air that swept across the land at dusk. It was sharper, heavier, and it lingered longer on the skin. The dew of morning began to crystallize into thin sheets of ice across grass and stone, sparkling under the weak sun like shards of glass. Hunters noticed that streams froze along their shallow edges, restricting the once free movement of fish. Women gathering plants found that the soil hardened, roots harder to pull. These were warnings, small but undeniable, that the season of abundance was closing. Animals, too, carried messages of change. Birds flew south in vast flocks, filling the skies with restless wings, abandoning the land to seek warmer skies. Herds of reindeer and mammoth began to move, their migration instinct triggered by the invisible pull of the coming winter. To cavemen, these shifts were more than curiosities. They were survival guides. Follow the herds, and there was hope of food. Fail to follow, and the tribe risked starvation. Even the behavior of small animals offered clues. Squirrels gathered nuts with feverish energy, beavers thickened their lodges with fresh branches, and wolves grew bolder, testing the boundaries of human camps. Perhaps the most powerful sign was the change in light. The sun, once a commanding presence in the sky, now lingered lower and weaker. Days grew shorter, while nights stretched like endless corridors of shadow. For cavemen, who depended on natural light to hunt and gather, this change was deeply unsettling. The long darkness was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous. In the blackness, predators thrived and cold intensified. Each sunset was a reminder that their window of safety was closing. Psychologically, the first frost stirred dread. Cavemen lived in a world without guarantees, where memory and experience were their only teachers. Elders, having endured countless winters, carried within them stories of hardship. The famine that followed poor hunting seasons, the children lost to sickness and the cold, the tribes wiped out when food ran out too soon. Around fires, these tales resurfaced as warnings to the young. The first frost was not just a natural event. It was a haunting reminder of what was at stake. Every decision in these weeks could mean the difference between survival and extinction. This period of transition also carried urgency. Once frost appeared, tribes knew they had only a narrow window to act. Meat had to be dried, roots and nuts stored, firewood gathered in greater amounts. Families worked with frantic energy, driven by fear and necessity. The sound of stone hammers cracking bones, of hides being scraped and stretched, of fires smoking with drying meat, all filled the air. What was not completed before the deep freeze will be lost forever. Those who delayed, who mistook the frost for a passing chill, often paid the ultimate price when winter struck in full. The frost also carried symbolism. To the human mind, which sought meaning in every natural event, the shimmering of ice across the land was both beautiful and terrifying. Some tribes may have seen it as a warning from spirits, others as a test from ancestors. Rituals were performed at this time. Songs sung to sun, offerings laid before fire, prayers whispered into the darkness, in hopes of appeasing unseen forces. The psychological weight of frost went beyond the physical. It became spiritual, a reminder that human life was small and fragile beneath the power of the earth. But for all its dread, the first frost was also a teacher. It sharpened awareness, honed instincts, and forced tribes into unity. The careless grew cautious. The weak leaned on the strong, and families gathered closer around the hearth. Frost reminded cavemen that survival was not individual, but collective. A fire needed tending. A hunt required teamwork. A shelter demanded many hands. It was this unity, forged under the pressure of frost, that gave humanity its greatest advantage over the beasts of the Ice Age. As the frost thickened into ice, the choice became clear. Stay and risk hunger and death, or begin the long journey to find safer lands. The frost was the first threshold, the signal that the time for decision had arrived. To ignore it was to invite ruin. To heed it was to accept the hardships of migration. The first frost, then, was more than a change of weather. It was the opening move in a struggle for survival, a silent but undeniable call to action. In the coming chapters of this story, we will see how tribes responded to this call. Some stayed, clinging to familiar caves and hunting grounds, hoping the cold would be mild or the animals would return. Others gathered their belongings, lifted children onto their shoulders, and marched into the unknown, following herds and rivers, guided only by instinct and hope. For all of them, the first frost marked the same reality. The season of death had begun, and only the prepared would live to see the return of spring. In the endless winter of the Ice Age, fire was more than warmth, more than light. It was life itself. To lose it was to surrender to the cold, to predators, and to despair. To keep it alive was to keep the tribe alive. In the frozen silence of night, when the wind cut like blades and snow buried the earth in suffocating white, the glow of flame meant the difference between survival and extinction. Fire was not simply a tool. It was a thin line that separated humanity from the chaos of nature. For prehistoric people, fire was sacred. It was fragile, demanding constant care. Sparks did not come easily. Kindling was scarce in a frozen world. The tribe often carried embers with them during migration, nestled carefully in containers of bark, stone, or animal horn, cushioned by moss or dung to keep them smoldering. To let those embers die was unthinkable. Hours could be spent striking flint against stone, coaxing the smallest spark to life, blowing it gently into flame. The effort was exhausting, but the reward was salvation. Fire provided heat, allowing bodies to endure nights that would otherwise freeze them where they slept. Wrapped in hides, lying close to the flames, families survived storms that would have killed them within hours without its protection. It gave light in the long blackness of winter, pushing back the shadows where wolves and cave lions prowled. Fire was a shield as much as it was warmth. Predators feared its glow, and for that reason, the tribe could sleep with a measure of safety. Around the fire, humanity carved out a fragile bubble of existence in a world that wanted them gone. But fire was more than defense. It was transformation. With fire, meat could be cooked, making it safer, easier to chew, and more nourishing. Roots and plants, once too bitter or poisonous to eat raw, became edible after being roasted. Bones, cracked over flames, revealed marrow rich in fat, a vital source of energy in times of famine. Fire unlocked hidden calories from the world, making survival more than a matter of raw hunger. It changed the human body, fueling brains that grew larger and more complex. In every flame burned the future of humanity itself. The presence of fire also shaped community. Families gathered around the hearth at night, telling stories, passing knowledge, and building bonds. The flickering light turned caves into sanctuaries, where the harshness of the world outside could be forgotten, if only for a while. Fire created a center, a place of unity, of planning, of ritual. Songs were sung in its glow, tools repaired by its light, strategies whispered as sparks rose into the night sky. It was not only warm for the body, but warm for the spirit, holding fear at bay through companionship. Yet fire was also fragile, and that fragility was a constant terror. A sudden gust of wind, a careless hand, or a storm of snow could extinguish it in moments. To lose the fire meant hours, sometimes days, of agony attempting to relight it. In deep winter, failure meant death. Archaeological evidence suggests that many tribes carried torches or burning branches as they traveled, ensuring that even in movement the flame never died. Fire was not simply made, it was guarded, as fiercely as a child or elder, as essential as food and water. The gathering of fuel was another endless task. In snow-covered landscapes, what was rare, hidden beneath drifts or encased in ice. Families scavenged constantly, stripping branches from dead trees, collecting brush, or burning bones and dung when wood was scarce. Each stick gathered was a deposit in the bank of survival. A fire could not be left to grow too large, wasting fuel, but it also could not be allowed to weaken. Managing fire was an art, a balance between conservation and survival, between endurance and immediate need. Spiritually, fire carried weight beyond the physical. To many groups, it was a gift from the gods or a force inhabited by spirits. It was treated with reverence, often accompanied by ritual. Sparks struck from stone were not random. They were sacred, symbols of life pulled from lifeless rock. Some evidence suggests that fire played a role in burial rites, with flames guiding the dead into another world. Around fires, stories were told not only of survival but of meaning, of purpose, of a human place in a vast, cold universe. Fire became a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. The contrast between fire and cold was not only physical but psychological. To step away from the fire, even for a short time, was to confront the brutal indifference of the world. The wind clawed at skin, the snow blinded, the silence threatened to crush the mind. To return to the fire was to feel relief, to reclaim safety. This contrast was etched into memory, shaping the human psyche to associate flame with comfort, darkness with fear. It is a memory that survives even now, as modern humans continue to gather around campfires, fireplaces, and lamps. But the greatest lesson of fire was movement. It allowed tribes to venture further, deeper into lands that would have been uninhabitable otherwise. It fueled migration, enabling humanity to follow herds into the coldest regions, to explore mountains and tundras. Fire expanded the map of human possibility, giving courage to walk into the unknown. Without it, humans might never have left the warmth of equatorial regions. With it, they became wanderers, pioneers of a frozen earth. In the Ice Age, fire was both fragile and eternal. It was a flame that could die in an instant, yet it was also a chain passed through generations, from one camp to another, from one family to the next. It was a heartbeat of survival, the thin red line glowing against the vast whiteness of winter. To study prehistoric survival is to understand that without fire, there is no story, no migration, no future. With fire, there is everything: safety, food, unity, and the courage to endure. The thin line between life and death burned in every flicker, every ember, every spark. Fire was humanity's companion, its shield, its teacher, and its greatest treasure. In the endless winter, nothing was more precious, nothing more feared to lose. Fire was not only survival, it was a promise that, even in the darkest night of the Ice Age, the light of humanity would endure. When the wind howled and the snow fell heavy, when fire alone could not shield the body from the merciless cold, humanity turned to its second line of defense: shelter. For the prehistoric tribes of the Ice Age, shelter was more than a roof over their heads. It was the fragile wall between life and death. A single night exposed to the elements could claim even the strongest hunter. Shelter provided not only warmth, but also a sense of belonging, a place where families could gather, where food could be stored, and where fire could burn without fear of the storm extinguishing it. It was a womb of survival, crafted out of necessity and ingenuity. The first and most obvious refuge was the cave, carved by time and water into the bones of mountains. Caves offered ready-made protection from wind, snow, and predators. Archaeological evidence across Europe and Asia shows that early humans, as well as their Neanderthal cousins, frequently occupied caves during the coldest months. Inside, firelight could be contained, smoke drawn out through natural vents, and walls decorated with the images of animals that defined their lives. Caves became more than shelter. They became sanctuaries of memory, culture, and ritual. Yet caves were not without danger. They were damp, filled with shadows, and often already claimed by bears, lions, or hyenas. To enter a cave was to gamble, to risk battle for the safety it promised. For those without access to caves, or for groups forced to migrate across open plains, shelters had to be built from the materials at hand. Mammoth bone huts are among the most striking examples of human ingenuity from this period. Archaeologists have uncovered circular structures crafted from the massive bones and tusks of mammoths, covered with hides and reinforced with branches. These huts, sometimes large enough to house several families, were sturdy fortresses against the cold. They reflected not only survival instinct, but also a remarkable ability to transform the remains of hunted beasts into the very walls that protected life. Animal hides, stretched and sewn together, formed another critical resource for portable shelters. Much like the teepees used by later indigenous peoples, these hide tents could be assembled quickly, taken down, and carried during migration. Flexible and practical, they allowed tribes to remain mobile while still guarding against freezing winds. In winter, they were often lined with layers of fur and insulated with grasses or moss. Smoke holes were cut at the top, allowing fire burns safely inside. For the families who slept within, these tents were fragile but precious, little islands of warmth in a sea of snow. Other shelters were simpler, but no less vital. In forests, branches and pine boughs were stacked into lean-tos, their slanted roofs shedding snow. In the tundra, snow itself was used, packed into mounds and hollowed out to create igloo-like refuges. These snow shelters, insulated by the very cold they resisted, trapped body heat and firelight within, turning freezing air into survivable space. Such ingenuity demonstrated that early humans were not merely victims of the Ice Age. They were active adapters, bending the environment to their will whenever possible. Shelters also carried social meaning. To build a hut, a tent, or even a lean-to required many hands. Men, women, and children all contributed, gathering branches, sewing hides, carrying stones, or packing snow. In the act of building, the tribe affirmed its unity. The walls were not merely physical. They were emotional, representing the cooperation and trust that bound the group together. Inside these shelters, the bonds of family and community were strengthened. Stories were told by firelight, laughter and whispers echoing against walls that held back the storm. To be sheltered was not only to be warm, but also to be part of something larger than oneself. Still, the dangers of poor shelter were ever present. A roof too thin could collapse under heavy snow. A wall not sealed tightly enough could let in freezing winds. A fire lit too close to hides could ignite the very walls meant to protect. Families lived in constant balance, monitoring their fragile refuges as carefully as they guarded their fires. For some, failure meant abandonment, packing up in the midst of a storm to seek safer ground, often at terrible cost. The ruins of collapsed shelters, found scattered across archaeological sites, stand as silent testimonies to these failures. Shelter, like fire, also took on spiritual dimensions. The cave, with its deep, echoing chambers, became the canvas of prehistoric art. Animals were painted on its walls not simply as decoration, but as prayers, invocations, or memories of hunts. Some scholars believe these images were meant to call upon the spirit of the animals, to ensure future abundance, or to bind the tribe to the world they inhabited. In this way, the cave became not only a place of safety, but also a place of connection between the human and the spiritual, the living and the eternal. The huts and tents, though less permanent, also carried meaning. They were symbols of resilience, proof that even in the most barren landscapes, humans could create shelter where none existed. To erect a hut from bones was to defy the cold with ingenuity, to carve a space of life from the remains of death. To stretch hides into walls was to turn the labor of the hunt into the foundation of survival. Every shelter was a statement. We will endure no matter how hostile the world becomes. The contrast between exposure and shelter defined human existence in the Ice Age. To step outside into the open wind and snow was to feel the fragility of life. To return inside, to firelight flickering against walls, was to feel the triumph of survival. This rhythm of leaving and returning, of risk and safety, shaped the psychology of prehistoric life. It instilled in humans a deep respect for spaces they created, and perhaps explains why the idea of home carries such power even today. Shelter, then, was never just about wood, bone, or hide. It was about safety, unity, memory, and meaning. It was a fortress against the cold, the cradle of culture, the womb of humanity's endurance. In the endless winter of the Ice Age, shelter stood alongside fire as the great protector, the space in which survival could unfold. Without it, even the strongest fire could not save them. With it, even the fiercest storm could be endured. In the world of endless winter, fire and shelter could preserve warmth, but without food the body would wither and die. More than any other need, sustenance dictated the rhythm of prehistoric life. Every day was a calculation of energy spent versus energy gained. A failed hunt, a barren stretch of land, or an unexpected storm could tip this delicate balance toward starvation. In such times, hunger was not a distant fear but a constant companion, gnawing at the belly, sharpening instincts, and driving human beings to extraordinary lengths to survive. Food in the frozen world was a scarce treasure. The great plains and tundras, covered in snow and ice, offered little in the way of edible plants during the winter months. Berries, roots, and nuts that might have been gathered in warmer seasons disappeared beneath the frost. The tribe turned instead to the animals that roamed the harsh landscape. These creatures, wrapped in thick fur and fat, carried within the calories and nutrients necessary for survival. Yet hunting them required skill, cooperation, and immense risk. To fail meant weakness, to succeed meant life. The mammoth, towering and formidable, was among the most prized of Ice Age prey. A single successful hunt could feed an entire group for weeks, its meat roasted over fires, its fat rendered into oil, its bones transformed into tools and shelters. But to face such a beast was to dance with death. Hunters armed with spears and courage would coordinate, driving the mammoth toward traps or cliffs, relying on teamwork to overcome its immense size. The victory of such a hunt brought not only nourishment, but also a sense of triumph over nature itself. Yet failure could leave hunters crushed underfoot, or force a tribe to wander hungry through the snow. Other animals provided more attainable prey. Reindeer and bison moved in herds across the steppe, their migrations tracked carefully by human eyes. Smaller game, hares, foxes, and birds, were caught with snares or simple weapons. Fish, when rivers and lakes were not frozen solid, offered a valuable resource, their oily flesh rich in energy. Every animal mattered. Nothing was wasted. Hides became clothing, bones became needles and knives, sinew became thread, and fat became both food and fuel for lamps. Survival demanded that humans honor the life they took by using every part of it. But the cold world also forced innovation. In times when large game could not be found, humans turned to scavenging. The remains of predators' kills were stripped of what little meat was left, marrow sucked from bones cracked with stone tools. Even the stomach contents of animals were sometimes eaten, offering partially digested plant matter during the hungriest months. These acts, born of desperation, revealed the thin line separating survival from extinction. Food gathering did not vanish completely in winter, though it was meager. Women and children often dug beneath the snow for roots or collected pine needles for teas that provided vitamins against sickness. Stores of dried berries, nuts, and seeds gathered in warmer months were carefully rationed. Mushrooms dried by summer fires were sometimes hidden in pouches or baskets. Honey, if hives were discovered, offered rare sweetness. These preserved foods were treasures, their value equal to that of a successful hunt, for they kept hunger at bay when game was scarce. Storage itself became a survival art. Without preservation, meat would rot or be eaten by scavengers. The cold itself was an ally, freezing carcasses naturally, but humans improved upon it. Meat was dried by firelight, smoked over smoldering embers, or buried beneath snow and ice to keep safe until needed. Fat was melted down and sealed into containers of bone or hide, preserved as a long-lasting energy source. These techniques were more than practical. They were revolutionary, allowing tribes to endure stretches of scarcity with a measure of security. Hunting and food distribution carried social importance. The success of a hunter was not his alone. It belonged to the group. Meat was shared, often according to traditions or rules that ensured fairness and unity. A hunter who hoarded food risked not only anger but exile, for selfishness threatened the survival of all. In turn, those who could no longer hunt, the elderly, the sick, or the very young, were fed by the community, their lives preserved by the sacrifices of others. Food was not just fuel for the body, but a bond between people, a tangible expression of trust and interdependence. There was also ritual in eating. Archaeological evidence suggests that feasts accompanied great hunts, moments when the entire tribe gathered to celebrate victory over the cold world. Around the fire, stories were told, dances performed, and the memory of the hunt preserved in word and gesture. To eat together was to affirm life, to remind one another that even in the bleakest winter, survival was possible. At the same time, the specter of hunger haunted these moments, a reminder that tomorrow might not bring such abundance. The psychological battle with hunger was as fierce as the physical one. Hunger made people restless, irritable, and desperate. It pushed them to travel further, to risk dangerous hunts, or to consume foods they might otherwise avoid. Yet it also sharpened their ingenuity. The very pressure of finding food in the frozen world drove humans to invent better tools, stronger weapons, and more cooperative strategies. In this way, hunger shaped not only daily survival but the very course of human evolution. The contrast between plenty and famine defined prehistoric life. A successful mammoth hunt meant fires crackling, children laughing, bellies full. A failed season meant weakness, sickness, and sometimes death. This pendulum between feasting and starvation left deep marks on human culture and memory. Even today, echoes of it remain in our instinct to feast during times of abundance and to fear scarcity. The Ice Age carved those instincts into the bones of our ancestors, forging resilience out of desperation. In the frozen world, food was never taken for granted. Every bite was earned, every scrap precious. It was hunted, gathered, stored, and shared with reverence, for it was a thread that tied humanity to the possibility of another sunrise. Without it, fire and shelter meant nothing. With it, even in the depths of winter, hope could endure. To survive in the frozen landscapes of the Ice Age, prehistoric humans had to become masters of the hunt. Hunting was never simply an act of chasing and killing. It was a carefully honed art, one that blended patience, knowledge of the land, and cooperation among tribe members. In a world where failure meant hunger and weakness, hunting demanded both courage and ingenuity. It was a daily test, and success depended not only on physical strength but on strategy, skill, and a deep understanding of animal behavior. The hunt began long before the spear was thrown. It started with observation. Hunters studied the migrations of animals, learning their habits, their preferred paths, their watering holes, and even the times of day they were most vulnerable. Reindeer moved across the plains in vast herds, bison thundered through valleys, and mammoths followed ancient routes across the steppe. Knowing when and where these creatures traveled was the foundation of survival. A mistake in timing could leave the tribe waiting in vain, expending precious energy with no reward. Once the animals were found, strategy took over. The sheer size of Ice Age megafauna meant that no single hunter could hope to succeed alone. Cooperation was essential. Groups of hunters worked together, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. They drove animals into narrow valleys, toward cliffs, or into traps where escape was difficult. Sometimes, fires were lit behind a herd, smoke and flames pushing the beasts toward waiting hunters. At other times, hunters disguised themselves with animal hides, moving slowly and silently, blending into the herd until a moment to strike arrived. Weapons were the hunters' most vital tools. Early spears, tipped with sharpened stone or bone, allowed hunters to strike from a distance, though often they still had to approach dangerously close. Later, advancements such as the atlatl, A spear thrower that used leverage to hurl projectiles farther and with greater force revolutionized hunting. With these tools, hunters could wound animals from a safer distance, increasing their chances of survival. Arrows and bows, though perfected in later times, began their development during this era, offering even more precision. Each innovation marked a step forward in humanity's mastery over prey that once seemed untouchable. But the weapons were only as effective as the courage of the hands that wielded them. Imagine standing before a mammoth, a wall of fur and muscle weighing several tons, armed only with a spear. One mistake could end a life in an instant. To hunt was to embrace danger willingly, to risk the possibility of being trampled, gored, or mauled. Even smaller animals posed risks. Bison charged, wild horses kicked, and predators like cave lions or wolves could turn the hunters into the hunted. Hunting required not only strength, but the ability to keep fear in check, to remain steady in the face of overwhelming odds. Traps and ambushes became crucial for survival. Pits were dug and disguised, sharp stakes hidden at the bottom, waiting for unsuspecting animals. Rocks were positioned to fall, rivers used as barriers, and narrow passes chosen as killing grounds. These methods reduced risk and increased efficiency, but they also required foresight, planning, and days of labor. They show that prehistoric humans were not reckless aggressors but careful strategists, capable of shaping the environment to aid in survival. Hunting was not only about providing food, but also about shaping identity. The hunt was a proving ground for young men, a test of skill and bravery that marked the passage into adulthood. Success brought prestige, while failure could bring shame. Within the tribe, skilled hunters gained respect, their names remembered in stories told around the fire. Yet the glory was never purely individual. Every hunt was shared, planned by the group, executed by the group, and celebrated by the group. The triumph belonged to all, for survival was collective. The act of hunting also carried spiritual weight. Many prehistoric cave paintings depict animals in vivid detail, often pierced with lines or arrows. Scholars debate whether these were records of hunts, magical invocations meant to ensure success, or symbolic acts honoring the spirits of the creatures taken. What is clear is that hunting was never just a practical act. It was tied to the human understanding of life, death, and the cycle of nature. To kill was to take a life, and to take a life was to enter into a relationship with forces larger than oneself. Rituals before and after hunts may have been ways to ask forgiveness, to give thanks, or to ensure future abundance. The risks of hunting shaped the social structure of tribes. Injured hunters needed care, which demanded compassion and cooperation from others. Children learned by watching, by carrying small tasks first, fetching stones, sharpening points, or helping a track game, before gradually stepping into the role of hunter themselves. Women, though often tasked with gathering, also participated in hunting in some groups, particularly smaller game. This shared responsibility made the hunt not merely the domain of a few, but the lifeblood of the community. Yet hunting was unpredictable. Some days brought success, the tribe feasting on fresh meat and dancing in the firelight. Other days brought nothing but exhaustion and hunger, the hunters returning empty-handed, the children crying in disappointment. These highs and lows taught resilience, reminding early humans that survival depended on persistence, patience, and the will to try again. In the frozen world, hunting was the ultimate gamble, with stakes measured in lives and futures. It demanded knowledge, cooperation, and courage, and it forged humans into creatures of intelligence and adaptability. The art of hunting was not just about killing prey. It was about outthinking it, enduring it, and learning from it. It was about walking the thin line between predator and prey, between triumph and tragedy. Without this art, humanity would never have endured the Ice Age. With it, they not only survived but laid the foundations of culture, community, and innovation. Each hunt was a story written in blood and fire, a testament to the fragile but unyielding determination of those who came before us. If fire and shelter were humanity's shields against the Ice Age, then tools were its swords, the instruments to which fragile flesh carved order out of chaos. In the frozen landscapes of the prehistoric world, bare hands could achieve little. But with stone, bone, and which shaped into tools, early humans became capable of extraordinary feats. Building shelters, making clothing, preparing food, and defending themselves against predators. Tools were the extension of the human mind, evidence that survival was not won by strength alone, but by intelligence, creativity, and foresight. The foundation of this ingenuity was stone. From the earliest chip flakes to finely crafted blades, stone tools mark humanity's rise as a tool-using species. Flint, obsidian, and chert were prized for their sharp edges, capable of slicing through hide, meat, and sinew. Archaeological discoveries show that hunters shaped these stones into points for spears, scrapers for hides, and knives for butchery. Each tool was made with care, for every strike of stone against stone risked shattering the core and wasting precious resources. In these small sparks of craftsmanship lay the future of survival. But stone was not the only material. Bone, antler, and ivory offered unique possibilities. The bones of mammoths, reindeer, and other large animals were carved into needles, awls, and hooks. Antlers, tough yet workable, became spear points or harpoon tips. Ivory, with its smooth surface, was fashioned into ornaments, figurines, and symbolic objects, showing that tools were not always practical but sometimes spiritual. These creations reveal a people who did not merely live from day to day, but who also expressed identity and meaning to the objects they shaped. One of the most revolutionary tools of the Ice Age was the spear thrower, or atlatl. This simple lever extended the hunter's arm, increasing both the speed and distance of a thrown spear. With it, humans could wound or kill prey from farther away, reducing the danger of close combat. The spear thrower was an innovation born from necessity, transforming hunting into a more strategic and less suicidal endeavor. Later, the bow and arrow would extend this principle even further, but even before its invention, the spear thrower was a marvel of human ingenuity. Stone blades and scrapers were also essential for clothing production. In the bitter cold, fur and hide were as important as food. Tools allowed hides to be stripped of fat, stretched, and sewn into garments. Bone needles threaded with sinew stitched together pieces of fur, creating parkas, leggings, and boots. These clothes were not crude improvisations, but carefully designed to keep warmth close to the body, allowing humans to push deeper into icy regions than their bare skin alone could ever endure. In this way, tools extended not only the hand, but the very limits of where humans could live. Fire itself was maintained with the help of tools. Flint and pyrite struck together could produce sparks, which were caught in tender bundles of dry grass, bark, or moss. Over time, humans refined their fire-making kits, ensuring they could carry the power of flame wherever they went. Without tools, fire was a gift of chance. With them, it became a reliable ally. This control marked one of the great shifts in human history, separating our ancestors from other creatures who knew warmth but not mastery. Yet tools were more than practical devices. They were symbols of memory and knowledge. To craft a tool was to learn from those who came before, to repeat the patterns passed down from parent to child, elder to youth. Every flake struck from a stone core carried the echo of generations. In teaching others to make tools, prehistoric humans transmitted not only techniques but culture itself. This transfer of knowledge created continuity, a thread binding together tribes across centuries of cold and hardship. The making of tools also shaped the mind. Crafting demanded patience, foresight, and the ability to imagine the final form hidden within raw material. This ability to envision possibilities was a uniquely human strength, setting us apart from the beasts we hunted. Each tool was an act of imagination, proof that survival was not mere instinct but conscious creation. In this sense, every stone knife and bone needle was not only an object, but also a testament to the human capacity for invention. Of course, tools were fragile and imperfect. A spear point might shatter on impact, leaving hunters vulnerable. A stone scraper might dull quickly, demanding hours of resharpening. A bone needle could snap in the cold, delaying the making of crucial clothing. These setbacks were reminders that survival depended on persistence. Tools had to be replaced, repaired, and refined constantly. The cycle of breaking and remaking became a rhythm of life, teaching resilience as much as skill. Tools also reveal the early roots of trade and exchange. Certain types of stone, such as obsidian, were rare and not found everywhere. Yet archaeological finds show that these materials traveled vast distances, suggesting that groups exchanged resources and knowledge. This exchange hints at networks of communication and cooperation across wide regions. Tools, therefore, were not only practical but also relational, binding tribes together in webs of contact and shared survival. Even in their simplest forms, tools reflected the dual nature of human existence, vulnerability and power. Without them, humans were weak, their bodies ill-equipped for the cold world. With them, they became hunters of giants, builders of shelters, makers of clothes, masters of fire. Each stone flake was a step away from helplessness and a step toward dominance. In the Ice Age, tools were not luxuries but lifelines, the bridge between extinction and endurance. The contrast could not be sharper. A bare hand against the hide of a mammoth would be torn and useless, but a sharpened spear point could pierce even the thickest skin. A body exposed to snow would freeze in hours, but clothes stitched with bone needles allowed survival for months. The difference was not in strength or size, but in the tools that transformed weakness into resilience. In the end, tools were more than objects of survival. They were reflections of the human spirit. They embodied creativity, perseverance, and the will to shape the world rather than be shaped by it. In the bleak expanse of the Ice Age, tools whispered of a brighter future, a world in which humanity's hands could build not only for survival, but for meaning, memory, and progress. With every stone flake and bone carving, humans declared, "We are more than victims of the cold. We are its conquerors." In the endless winter of the Ice Age, human skin was far too fragile to stand against the biting cold. Unlike the mammoth with its shaggy coat or the reindeer with its thick hide, humans were born nearly bare, their bodies poorly equipped to endure the snow and wind. To survive, they needed an artificial skin, clothing crafted from the world around them. These garments were not luxuries. They were shields of life, woven from the death of animals and the ingenuity of human hands. Without clothing, survival in sub-zero landscapes would have been impossible. With it, people could push into harsher environments, exploring and enduring where no bare body could hope to last. The earliest clothing likely began as simple draped hides. A freshly killed animal, skinned and softened, could be wrapped around the shoulders like a blanket. Such crude coverings gave immediate warmth, but they were heavy, stiff, and difficult to move in. Over time, humans learned to process hides more carefully. Scrapers made from flint or bone removed fat and flesh, stretching hides until they became supple. Smoke curing and drying techniques prevented decay, while animal brains rich in oils were sometimes used to soften leather. These innovations transformed rough skins into workable material, opening the way for tailored garments that fit the body snugly and efficiently. The needle was perhaps the most important invention for Ice Age clothing. Fashioned from bone or ivory and threaded with sinew or plant fibers, it allowed humans to stitch hides together rather than drape them crudely. For the first time, clothing could be shaped, fitted, and layered. Parkas, leggings, boots, and gloves emerged, mimicking the natural adaptations of fur-covered animals, but in human form. Sewing was not merely practical. It was a creative act, one that revealed foresight, dexterity, and a vision for protection beyond instinct. With each stitch, humans claimed mastery over the cold. Different types of clothing served different needs. Furs with thick undercoats, such as reindeer or fox, were prized for warmth. Lighter hides, like those of deer, made flexible garments for layering. Mammoth hides, though heavy, could serve as blankets, bedding, or even tent covers. Multiple layers created insulation, trapping warm air close to the skin. Boots lined with fur protected feet from frostbite, while hoods and gloves shielded extremities from freezing winds. Archaeological finds suggest that Ice Age people were not only functional in their designs, but also resourceful, combining different materials to maximize protection. Decoration, too, played its part. Beads made of bone shells and ivory have been discovered sewn into ancient garments. While warmth was a primary goal, there was also room for beauty, symbolism, and identity. These decorations may have marked status within the tribe, told stories, or carried spiritual meaning. Clothing was thus more than survival gear. It was an expression of culture, pride, and belonging. In a world dominated by danger, even the simplest bead or stitch was a quiet statement. We are more than mere survivors. We are humans who create. Clothing also shaped social roles. Women are believed to have played a central part in sewing and maintaining garments. Their skill with needles as essential to survival as a hunter's skill with spears. Children learned to scrape hides and thread sinew, practicing the skills they would one day need to preserve their own lives. In this way, clothing became a communal effort, a daily rhythm of preparation and repair. Around the fire at night, garments were patched, seams reinforced, boots mended, a constant labor that never truly ended. Each stitch was a barrier against death, each repaired tear a small victory over the cold. But clothing was fragile, and its failure could be deadly. A hole in a boot might mean frostbite within hours. A ripped parka could let in wind that chilled the body to exhaustion. Archaeological evidence of frostbitten bones and amputations shows that mistakes in clothing maintenance carried severe costs. To live in the Ice Age meant to treat garments with the same reverence as fire and food. They were not possessions to be taken for granted, but lifelines woven from the threads of survival. The psychological impact of clothing was profound. To step outside into the snow wrapped in layers of fur was to feel shielded, armored against the elements. To be naked, even for a short time, was to feel vulnerable and exposed. Clothing did more than protect the body. It gave confidence to face the wilderness. It turned fragile humans into beings capable of enduring the very climate that killed so many creatures. In this sense, clothing was not just material. It was psychological armor, a reminder that survival was within reach if one was prepared. As with fire and tools, clothing became part of humanity's spiritual imagination. Some garments may have been reserved for rituals, adorned with symbols or special materials. Shamans, wrapped in decorated furs, may have used clothing to embody the spirits of animals or to signify their role as guides between the human and the spiritual world. In this way, clothing crossed a line between the practical and the mystical, binding survival and meaning into a single fabric. The contrast was stark. Without clothing, the wind stripped warmth from the skin in minutes, leaving bodies shivering, then numb, then still. With clothing, people could march across frozen plains, hunt in storms, and build shelters in the snow. This difference, the presence or absence of stitched hides, meant the difference between extinction and expansion. The ability to make and maintain clothing allowed humans to inhabit lands where no other primates could live, a triumph of invention over nature's cruelty. In the story of Ice Age survival, clothing stands as one of the most overlooked but most crucial achievements. It was not glamorous like hunting mammoths, nor as dramatic as fire blazing against the night, but it was steady, constant, and essential. Every stitch, every seam, every softened hide carried the weight of survival. Clothing transformed weakness into resilience, nakedness into armor, and fragility into endurance. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, furs and hides whispered the quiet victory of human hands over the cold. In the long winters of the Ice Age, survival was never a solitary act. One human, alone in the cold, could not last long. Fire might warm for a moment. Clothing might shield for a night, but hunger, predators, and illness made isolation unbearable. What made humans different from the solitary hunters of the wild was their reliance on each other. Family, kinship, and the deep bonds of community were not just comforts. They were strategies of survival. To gather close was to live, and to be cast out was often a slow death in the snow. The hearth was the center of this social world. Around the fire, families huddled together, sharing warmth as much as food. The glow of flames illuminated faces, turned shadows into familiar shapes, and drove back the fear of what lurked outside. In that circle of light, children learned stories of ancestors, hunters planned tomorrow's journeys, and elders offered advice born from years of endurance. Fire was more than heat. It was memory, connection, and identity. It transformed a scattered group of individuals into a tribe bound by shared survival. Kinship networks provided structure and protection. Blood ties often determined who ate first, who cared for children, and who led the group. Yet Ice Age survival required more than simple family units. Tribes were formed of extended families, bands of dozens of individuals who pooled skills and resources. One hunter's failure could be balanced by another's success. One woman's sewing could clothe many. Elders, though too frail to hunt, held vast stores of knowledge. Where the rivers froze last, where reindeer passed, where shelters had once been safe. In a world of scarcity, the wisdom of the old was as precious as the strength of the young. Winter placed unique stresses on these bonds. Food was limited, and hunger sharpened tempers. Choices had to be made. Who would eat? Who would fast? Who would risk the dangerous hunt? Archaeological evidence of cut marks on bones suggests that sometimes, in desperation, tribes turned against the weakest, perhaps even practicing cannibalism when starvation loomed. Such acts, though horrifying, reveal the immense pressure of winter survival. At the same time, they highlight the opposite. In less desperate times, people worked tirelessly to protect the vulnerable, ensuring that children and elders, though unproductive in a narrow sense, were preserved as the lifeblood of the group. Children were central to these efforts. They represented continuity, hope, and the future of the tribe. In winter, their survival was especially precarious, their small bodies more vulnerable to cold and hunger. Families wrapped them in furs, placed them nearest the fire, and gave them portions of fat-rich food when possible. Songs, lullabies, and simple games eased their fears. To preserve a child was to declare faith that spring would come, that the struggle was not in vain. Every child who endured the winter was proof of resilience, a living flame against the snow. The bonds between men and women were equally crucial. Hunting required physical strength and courage, but sewing, food preparation, and fire maintenance required equal dedication. Neither role could succeed without the other. Archaeological finds suggest that tasks were often shared or rotated, showing that flexibility was as important as tradition. Partnerships in survival became partnerships in life. Couples may have been formed as much for their ability to cooperate as for affection, and love itself, in such a harsh world, was perhaps another form of survival strategy. Group rituals strengthened these connections. Shared meals, even when small, were distributed with a sense of fairness. Storytelling kept spirits alive during long nights, reinforcing the idea that each person belonged to something greater than themselves. Rituals honoring ancestors gave meaning to hardship, suggesting that suffering linked the living to those who had endured before. These shared practices helped maintain unity, reminding everyone that despair could be faced together, not alone. Conflict, of course, was inevitable. Tensions rose when resources dwindled. A poor hunt or a failed shelter could spark arguments, accusations, even violence. Yet tribes developed ways to resolve disputes, through councils of elders, through symbolic rituals, or through temporary separations. For survival, harmony had to be restored quickly. In the freezing dark, grudges were luxuries no one could afford. A tribe divided was a tribe destroyed. Archaeological sites suggest cooperation even beyond the immediate family or tribe. Some groups exchanged tools, hides, or food with neighboring bands. Marriage may have been a tool of diplomacy, forging alliances that expanded survival networks. In this way, kinship was not limited by blood, but extended by strategy. A cousin in another valley might one day mean the difference between life and death. Social bonds stretched across miles, as fragile yet vital as the sinew threads that bound hides into clothing. The psychological strength drawn from these bonds cannot be overstated. Loneliness, fear, and despair were as dangerous as cold and hunger. In groups, laughter could exist, even in hardship. A song shared in the dark, a story told by an elder, or the simple closeness of another body could renew the will to endure. To feel part of something larger than oneself was to carry hope through the storm. The tribe was not only physical protection, but also emotional shelter, guarding the mind against surrender. In the Ice Age, survival was a communal art. Each member of the tribe was a thread, woven together into a fabric that resisted the tearing winds of winter. Alone, the thread frayed and snapped. Together, the fabric held strong. Family, kinship, and community were the invisible shelters, as essential as fire and clothing. They turned the frozen world from an endless threat into a place where life could endure. The contrast was absolute. Isolation meant weakness, despair, and death, while togetherness meant resilience, endurance, and hope. In this balance, humans found their truest strength, not in muscle, not in speed, but in connection. It was an embrace of family, in the voices around the fire, in the hands that worked together. That Ice Age people endured winters that would have crushed them alone. In the frozen silence of Ice Age winters, when storms howled outside and death lingered near, rituals and beliefs became anchors for the human spirit. Food could feed the body, fire could warm the skin, clothing could protect the flesh. But survival demanded more than physical defenses. The mind needed strength, the heart needed meaning, and fear needed to be tamed. Rituals and beliefs gave humans a way to frame suffering, to explain the unexplainable, and to find courage in the face of overwhelming cold and uncertainty. The night sky played a powerful role in shaping belief. Imagine a tribe huddled in their shelter, peering at the stars through gaps in the clouds. The endless expanse above was filled with patterns and lights that seemed alive, shifting as the seasons changed. To the Ice Age mind, these constellations were not random. They were messages, signs, and stories. The migration of animals, the arrival of winter, even the length of days were linked to the movement of stars. Ritual chants or dances beneath the heavens may have been performed to honor these celestial forces, asking them for guidance or mercy. Death, ever present in the winter landscape, also demanded ritual. Burials from Ice Age sites reveal care and symbolism. Bodies placed in crouched positions, covered with red ochre, surrounded by beads, tools, or animal bones. These practices were not accidents. They suggested that people believed in an existence beyond death, a continuation of the journey. Such beliefs eased the sting of loss and reminded survivors that death was not an end but a passage. For a child who had lost a parent or a hunter who had lost a companion, these rituals brought comfort, softening despair with the promise of spiritual continuity. Animals, too, were woven into ritual life. Mammoths, reindeer, bison, and bears were not just prey. They were spirits, teachers, and sometimes even deities. Cave art, painted deep in the earth, depicted these creatures in powerful forms, as though capturing their essence for worship or magic. Before a hunt, rituals may have been performed to honor the animal's spirit, asking forgiveness for taking its life or praying for a successful kill. Afterward, bones and skulls might be arranged in sacred patterns, offerings given to unseen forces that govern survival. In this way, ritual turned hunting from a desperate act of survival into a sacred exchange, balancing respect with necessity. Winter intensified the need for such practices. In times of abundance, belief was a backdrop, a cultural rhythm. But in times of scarcity, when hunger gnawed and frostbitten winds threatened to extinguish life, rituals became urgent. Chants, dances, and offerings filled the darkness with sound and meaning. A ritual around the fire could transform a fearful night into a shared act of hope. Even when food was gone, people could still feed their spirits with ceremony. Rituals were, in a sense, survival tools, psychological weapons against despair. Shamans emerged as vital figures in this world. Half healer, half mystic, they guided tribes through sickness, misfortune, and the mysteries of existence. Wrapped in decorated furs, adorned with beads and bones, they stood as mediators between the human and the spiritual. Through trance, drumming, or rhythmic chanting, they claimed to speak with animal spirits, ancestors, or forces of nature. Whether or not their visions were real mattered less than the effect. They gave direction, restored unity, and inspired belief that survival was still possible. The tribe looked to them in fear and reverence, for in the bleakest hours, their words carried weight heavier than stone. Rituals also served as social glue. When a tribe gathered to chant, dance, or tell sacred stories, they reaffirmed their unity. These moments of shared belief reminded individuals that they were not alone in facing the cold. Symbols and myths became common ground, binding the tribe with invisible threads stronger than sinew. A child who repeated the words of a story told by elders joined a chain stretching back generations, gaining courage from a knowledge that others had endured the same hardships. Archaeological evidence suggests that rituals may have included music. Flutes made from bird bones have been discovered in Ice Age sites, some dating back more than 35,000 years. The sound of music, echoing through caves or rising into the winter night, would have been a powerful force. It soothed the weary, lifted spirits, and perhaps carried prayers to the unseen. Songs were easy to remember, portable rituals that required no tools but the human voice. In the darkness of winter, a song could transform silence into solidarity. The contrast between ritual and despair was profound. Without rituals, winter could feel like an endless, meaningless struggle against death. With rituals, even suffering became part of a greater story. Illness could be seen as a spiritual test, hunger as a trial, and death as a passage rather than an end. Rituals and beliefs reframed hardship, transforming it from chaos into order, from fear into resilience. At the deepest level, rituals prepared the mind for survival. The human body could endure hunger, cold, and exhaustion, but only if the mind believed endurance had purpose. Rituals gave that purpose. They told people why they should keep fighting, why they should protect children, why they should gather for another hunt. Without belief, survival was only struggle. With belief, survival became destiny. In the Ice Age, when the nights were long and the winds merciless, rituals and beliefs were as essential as fire and food. They sustained not only the flesh, but also the soul. They turned fear into courage, loss into remembrance, and hardship into meaning. Through ritual, humans did not merely endure the winter. They transcended it, declaring that even in the coldest, darkest places, life could be more than survival. Life could be sacred. In the white silence of Ice Age winters, humans were not the only beings struggling to survive. The frozen world was shared with predators just as hungry, just as desperate, and often far better adapted to the cold. To step beyond the fire's glow was to enter contested ground, where wolves prowled in packs, cave lions stalked silently, and even other human bands could appear as sudden rivals. For Ice Age people, winter was not only a fight against elements, but also a battle for territory, food, and life itself. Every encounter with predator or rival tested courage, unity, and cunning. Wolves were among the most common threats. In winter, when prey grew scarce, packs became bolder, trailing human groups across the snow. Their yellow eyes glinted just beyond the shadows, their howls echoing through valleys like a warning of death drawing near. A single wolf was dangerous, but dozens moving together were almost unstoppable. Humans survived such threats by fire and numbers, standing shoulder to shoulder, brandishing spears tipped with fire, and shouting to amplify their presence. Yet even as wolves threatened, they also fascinated. Over generations, a strange partnership would emerge, with some wolves drawn to human camps, scavenging scraps, and slowly evolving into companions. But in the Ice Age winters, there remained more foe than friend, a nightly test of human vigilance. Even deadlier were the great cats, cave lions and saber-toothed predators. Unlike wolves, they hunted with silence. A cave lion could stalk a hunter for hours, blending with the snow and striking when least expected. Their size alone, larger than modern lions, made them formidable foes. A single swipe of their claws could kill. Archaeological sites reveal human bones marked by lion teeth, grim evidence of hunters becoming hunted. To face such a beast required teamwork, planning, and weapons prepared in advance. The contrast was sharp. A successful defense meant meat, fur, and pride, while failure left only blood in the snow. Bears, too, haunted the winter landscape. In caves that humans often sought for shelter, they sometimes found signs of massive hibernators. A bear awakened prematurely was a furious danger, one that could scatter an entire group. To share territory with such a beast was to live with constant caution. Some tribes avoided caves with bare bones, treating them as sacred or cursed. Others may have seen the bear as a spirit, worthy of worship or fear. Either way, the bear embodied winter's raw power, slow, heavy, relentless, and lethal when provoked. Predators were not the only rivals. Other humans posed equal, if not greater, threats. The Ice Age was marked by competition between different groups, sometimes of the same species, and sometimes not. Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens crossed paths in Europe and Asia, their encounters leaving mixed legacies. Some interactions may have involved trade, shared knowledge, or interbreeding. Others ended in violence, as scarce resources forced desperate choices. Archaeological sites showing trauma wounds and weapons buried in bodies suggest that tribal clashes were real, sudden, and often deadly. In the stillness of winter, when food was scarcest, the risk of conflict increased, turning neighbors into enemies. Territory was everything. A valley rich with reindeer herds or a cave that offered protection could mean the difference between survival and extinction. When two groups laid claim to the same land, tension was inevitable. Negotiation may have been attempted, an exchange of goods, a marriage alliance, a ritual display of dominance. But when talks failed, violence was the final language. Spears clashed in the snow, shouts echoed against icy cliffs, and blood froze quickly on the ground. Victory brought security. Defeat meant flight or annihilation. In these moments, survival hinged not just on strength but on unity and strategy. The psychological toll of predators and rivals was immense. The constant threat of attack meant sleepless nights, watchful eyes, and heightened alertness. Children were taught early to recognize the signs of danger, the sound of distant howls, the smell of predators on the wind, the sight of unfamiliar tracks in the snow. Fear became a survival tool, sharpening the senses, ensuring that no one strayed too far from safety. Yet too much fear could paralyze, leaving the group vulnerable. Rituals, songs, and stories helped balance this, teaching courage while acknowledging danger. Encounters with predators also inspired creativity. Spears were hardened in fire, points sharpened from flint, and throwing techniques refined. Defensive strategies were developed, with groups forming protective circles around the vulnerable. In some cases, humans even turned predators into resources. A slain lion or wolf provided fur, bones for tools, and meat. To kill such a creature was not only survival, but also triumph, a symbolic reversal of power, where prey became predator. Such victories echoed in stories told for generations, affirming human resilience against the wild. At the same time, not all encounters ended in blood. Evidence suggests moments of coexistence, particularly with wolves. The early stages of domestication may have begun in winters, when hungry wolves lingered near human camps, scavenging remains. Humans, recognizing their value as hunters and guards, may have tolerated them, feeding scraps in exchange for warning howls. This fragile alliance marked the beginning of one of the most important relationships in human history, the partnership between man and dog. It was a rare example of survival through cooperation rather than conflict. The contrasts of winter encounters were stark and unforgiving. A predator's shadow could mean sudden death or unexpected bounty. A rival tribe's arrival could mean friendship or slaughter. Every meeting in the snow carried uncertainty, every footstep beyond the firelight a gamble. Yet it was in facing these dangers that humans grew sharper, more united, more inventive. Predators forced humans to refine weapons. Rivals forced them to build stronger social bonds. Danger was constant, but so too was adaptation. In the Ice Age, survival meant more than enduring the cold. It meant navigating a world of enemies and competitors, seen and unseen. Humans stood at the edge of extinction countless times, hemmed in by claws, teeth, and spears. Yet through fire, unity, cunning, and courage, they endured. Every encounter in the snow was a trial, a reminder that survival was never guaranteed, but also that resilience could triumph against even the fiercest of foes. The Ice Age was not a time of stillness. It was a world in motion, a vast landscape of shifting glaciers, frozen rivers, and migrating herds. To survive, humans could not remain in one place for long. Food sources vanished, seasons changed, and predators grew too numerous. Migration, sometimes a few miles, sometimes hundreds, became the lifeblood of survival. These journeys across frozen landscapes were not leisurely wanderings, but epic tests of endurance, planning, and unity. Every step carried risk, yet every journey carried hope. The promise of food, shelter, and life beyond the snow. Travel began with preparation. Before a group set out, decisions had to be made. Which direction to follow, which rivers to cross, which valleys to avoid. Scouts studied the land for tracks of reindeer, mammoth, or bison, their eyes trained to notice the faintest signs in snow and ice. Elders recalled past journeys, warning of storms, treacherous ice, or rival tribes. Once the path was chosen, the tribe gathered its resources, furs, tools, fire bundles, dried meat, and water stored in animal skins. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was carried without purpose. For in winter, every extra burden could mean exhaustion, and exhaustion could mean death. The march itself was grueling. Across icy plains, feet sank into snow, legs ached with cold, and winds battered exposed skin. Children were carried or pulled on sleds fashioned from bone and hide, their cries muffled by the howl of blizzards. Elders, slower in pace, leaned on carved staffs, relying on the group's patience and protection. Each step tested endurance, but halting too long risked freezing in place. So the group pressed forward, guided by the will to find shelter before darkness fell. Shelters during migration were temporary, often little more than snow huts, windbreaks of branches, or caves stumbled upon by chance. Inside, the tribe huddled together, sharing warmth. Fires were lit with tinder carefully preserved from the last camp, for without fire, the night was deadly. Songs, chants, and stories helped carry weary minds through the long waits between movements. For children, these nights became lessons. Survival was not only physical but also mental, and to believe in tomorrow was as essential as to prepare for it. Migration was shaped by the rhythm of animals. Humans followed reindeer herds across tundras, shadowed mammoths along valleys, and tracked fish-rich rivers as they thawed. Where the animals went, people followed, for without them there was no food, no clothing, no tools. This pursuit tied humans to the land in cycles, binding their fate to creatures they hunted and revered. Yet the chase was perilous. Too close and predators struck. Too far and hunger gnawed. Timing was everything. Arrive early, and prey had not yet gathered. Arrive late, and they were gone. Migration demanded not only strength, but also patience, foresight, and luck. Natural obstacles turned every journey into a gamble. Rivers iced over deceptively, appearing solid but breaking under careless feet. Glaciers shifted, blocking familiar paths with walls of ice taller than trees. Storms struck suddenly, burying landmarks beneath drifts and leaving tribes disoriented in a white void. In such moments, survival hinged on instinct and unity. A single wrong turn could lead to endless wandering, but a well-remembered landmark, a boulder, a tree, a cave, could guide the tribe back to safety. Rival tribes added another layer of risk. Migration often brought humans into contested territory. Valleys rich in game or caves with natural warmth were rare, and many groups sought them. Encounters could mean trade and cooperation, exchanging hides, tools, or mates to strengthen bonds. But more often, scarcity bred hostility. Spears were raised, warnings shouted, and if words failed, blood stained the snow. For tribes already weakened by hunger, such conflicts could be devastating. Migration, then, was not only a journey across the land, but also a crossing into uncertainty, where strangers could be friends or foes. Despite dangers, migration brought opportunities. New lands meant new resources. Flint for sharper tools, rivers filled with fish, forests with fresh game. These discoveries enriched survival, expanding the horizons of what was possible. Over time, migration shaped human adaptability. Each new environment demanded new skills: how to fish in rivers, how to build shelters from ice, how to track animals in forests. These lessons accumulated, passed down through generations, creating a store of knowledge that grew with every journey. Migration did not only preserve life, it advanced it. The psychological strain of these journeys was immense. Days of endless white, where the horizon blurred into sky, tested the will. Hunger slowed steps. Cold numbed resolve, and despair crept silently. Yet, within the group, encouragement flowed. Hunters promised food ahead. Elders told stories of ancestors who had survived worse, and mothers soothed children with songs. Hope was carried as carefully as fire, for without hope, legs would falter and hearts would fail. In the Ice Age, belief in a destination was as vital as reaching it. These migrations were not only practical, but also sacred. For many tribes, movement was tied to ritual. Leaving an old camp meant thanking the spirits of that land. Arriving at a new one meant offerings for safety and success. The landscape itself became alive in their imagination. Rivers as gods, mountains as guardians, forests as places of spirits. Migration was thus both survival and pilgrimage, a constant journey through a sacred world where every step carried meaning. The contrast of movement was clear. To remain still was to starve, to freeze, to die with dwindling resources. To move was to risk exhaustion, predators, and rival encounters, but also to find life renewed. Migration embodied the paradox of Ice Age survival: danger in every direction, but hope only in forward motion. Across frozen landscapes, humans walked paths that stretched for miles and generations. These journeys left no written maps, only trails of memory and legend. Yet each step carved into snow carried the weight of survival, of culture, and of destiny. Migration was not only a strategy, it was the heartbeat of Ice Age humanity. carrying tribes across the harshest world and into the possibility of tomorrow. Survival during the Ice Age was not only a battle against the body's limits, but also against the mind's endurance. The endless winter created a world where snow stretched to the horizon, where days passed with little change, and where silence pressed down as heavily as the cold itself. For prehistoric humans, this was not simply a physical trial. It was a psychological crucible in which fear, despair, hope, and resilience intertwined to shape the human spirit. The harsh climate carved not only the land, but also the inner lives of those who struggle within it. Fear was constant. It was a silent shadow of survival. Every night, as families huddled together in flickering firelight, they listened to the growls of wolves, the howls of wind, or the distant cracking of ice. Fear came from predators stalking beyond the glow of the fire, from storms capable of burying entire camps, and from hunger gnawing relentlessly at the belly. Children, sensing their parents' unease, grew up in a world where danger was not occasional but daily. Yet fear was more than an emotion. It was also a guide. It sharpened instincts, urged caution, and reminded hunters to respect the power of the wild. Without fear, recklessness would have led many to perish. But fear alone was not enough to sustain life. Alongside it lived despair, the most dangerous enemy of all. Long winters often stretched far beyond expectation, and food grew scarce. Hunters returned empty-handed. Fires dwindled, and frost crept into shelters. In these moments, hopelessness threatened to unravel the group. Despair whispered that tomorrow would bring no change, that the cold was endless, and that death was inevitable. To give in to despair was to stop moving, to stop fighting, to stop believing. Many tribes understood this and fought against it with stories, rituals, and shared encouragement. The battle against despair was as real as any against beasts or storms. Hope was the counterbalance to despair. Hope was fragile, yet essential. It lived in the promise of spring, in the sight of animal tracks, in the spark of fire catching tinder after 100 tries. Hope was carried by leaders who spoke of distant valleys with food, by mothers who sang of warmth and safety, and by elders who told stories of ancestors who survived even harsher winters. Hope kept weary feet moving across frozen plains, kept tired hunters lifting their spears, and kept tribes pushing forward when the cold urged them to stop. In the Ice Age, hope was not a luxury. It was a survival tool as vital as fire or fur. Resilience grew out of the balance between fear and hope. It was resilience that allowed tribes to endure weeks without sunlight, when the world seemed nothing but darkness. It was resilience that turned grief for the dead into determination for the living. Humans learned to bend without breaking, to suffer without surrendering. Children raised in this environment grew strong not just in body but in spirit, inheriting the toughness of their parents and carrying it into the next generation. Resilience was not passive endurance. It was active defiance, a choice made each day to face the cold and live. The psychological landscape of endless winter also shaped community bonds. Loneliness was deadly. Isolation bred despair. The group was both shield and comfort. Around fires, laughter and storytelling became medicine for the spirit. Songs echoed inside caves, reminding all that they were part of something greater than themselves. Even simple rituals, sharing a meal, dancing to honor the hunt, chanting prayers before sleep, reinforced unity and lifted spirits. These small acts of connection built resilience by transforming fear into courage and despair into shared endurance. Imagination, too, became a weapon of survival. Prehistoric humans filled the emptiness of long nights with stories of spirits, gods, and ancestors. These tales gave meaning to suffering, painting the cold as a test and life as a sacred journey. They believed storms were the breath of gods, animals were gifts from spirits, and stars were guides across frozen plains. By embedding hardship into a spiritual framework, they turned chaos into order. Belief gave them the mental strength to persist when reality seemed unbearable. Children were central to this psychological battle. For parents, the sight of a child's shivering body or the sound of a hungry cry was both a source of pain and motivation. Protecting children gave adults purpose. Their survival meant the tribe's future. Children, in turn, grew resilient by witnessing their parents' struggles and learning early the values of endurance, patience, and courage. The resilience of humanity was not just preserved, It was cultivated in each new generation, shaped by the weight of winter. Loss was inevitable, and grief became part of the psychological fabric of survival. Death came from hunger, from cold, from accidents on ice, from predators in the dark. Every tribe knew loss, and every loss threatened morale. But humans developed rituals to manage grief, burying the dead with care, marking graves with stones, or telling stories of their bravery. These acts transformed sorrow into remembrance, preventing despair from consuming the living. Through ritual, grief was softened, and resilience was strengthened. The endless winter also taught patience. Unlike sudden disasters, it was a slow, grinding trial. Days blended together, and survival required waiting. Waiting for storms to end, for animals to return, for spring to thaw the land. This waiting demanded mental endurance. Humans learned to see time differently, to measure progress not in days but in survival itself. Each sunrise became a victory. Each night survived a triumph. In this way, patience became resilience in practice, teaching humanity that persistence could outlast even the coldest season. Finally, the psychological resilience of Ice Age humans was not just about survival. It was about evolution. Those who mastered fear, who resisted despair, who nurtured hope, and who strengthened resilience passed these traits on to their children. Over generations, humanity's ability to endure hardship became part of its identity. This mental toughness prepared them not only to survive the Ice Age, but also to thrive in new worlds as climates changed and opportunities arose. The endless winter was more than an environment. It was a teacher. It tested humanity's spirit, demanding fear as a warning, hope as a guide, and resilience as a foundation. From its trials emerged not broken beings, but a species stronger in mind and soul. It was in the crucible of ice and snow that humanity learned one of its most enduring truths. Survival is not only of the body, but of the spirit, and resilience is a fire that burns when all else turns to cold. The story of prehistoric humans surviving the Ice Age is not simply an account of the distant past. It is also a mirror reflecting the timeless qualities of human endurance, ingenuity, and community. Though tens of thousands of years separate us from those who once huddled in caves and trudged across frozen plains, their struggles and triumphs still echo in the lives we lead today. The Ice Age shaped us not only biologically, but also psychologically, culturally, and spiritually. Its legacy endures in the tools we wield, the societies we build, and the lessons we continue to draw from the resilience of our ancestors. One of the most profound lessons is the role of adaptability. Prehistoric humans could not control the climate. They could not command the snow to stop or the sun to shine. What they could do, however, was adapt. They changed their diets, shifted their hunting strategies, developed clothing, and migrated to safer lands. In this ability to bend without breaking lies the very essence of human survival. Even today, in the face of modern challenges, such as climate change, natural disasters, or global pandemics, adaptability remains our strongest ally. The Ice Age reminds us that survival is not about resisting change, but about embracing it with creativity and determination. The legacy of community is another central lesson. Alone, an Ice Age human had little chance of surviving the endless cold. But together, bands of families could share warmth, divide labor, and pool knowledge. They hunted in coordinated groups, raised children collectively, and carried the weak or wounded across harsh terrain. This instinct for cooperation became deeply ingrained in human culture. In a modern world where individualism often dominates, the Ice Age teaches us that community is not a luxury, but a necessity. Our ancestors survived because they relied on one another, and so must we in times of crisis or hardship. Technology, too, leaves a lasting legacy. The first fire-starting tools, the earliest sewing needles, the stone-tipped spears. These were humble beginnings of a journey that continues into the digital age. Every invention, from the wheel to the smartphone, is part of the same lineage of ingenuity that began when prehistoric humans first shaped stone into blades. The Ice Age demonstrates that technology is not an accessory to survival, but a foundation of it. Our modern conveniences, central heating, preserved food, medical care, are all echoes of those first sparks struck from stone. Recognizing this continuity deepens our appreciation for the tools we often take for granted today. The psychological lessons are equally enduring. The Ice Age was a trial of the human spirit, demanding patience, resilience, and hope in the face of relentless adversity. Modern life, though far removed from frozen tundras, presents its own forms of endless winter, uncertainty, loss, isolation, and hardship. From our ancestors, we learn that fear can be transformed into caution, despair can be tempered by ritual, and hope can be nurtured even in the darkest nights. Their resilience shows us that endurance is not passive. It is the active choice to keep moving, to keep fighting, to keep believing in tomorrow. The relationship between humans and nature is another enduring theme. Ice Age people understood that nature was both provider and destroyer. It offered food, fur, and shelter, but also tested them with storms, predators, and famine. This delicate balance fostered respect, ritual, and spirituality. Animals were honored in cave paintings, natural forces were woven into myths, and survival itself was seen as a sacred gift. Today, as we face environmental crises of our own making, the Ice Age warns us against arrogance. It reminds us that we are not masters of nature, but participants in it, dependent on its balance for survival. The legacy of migration is also striking. Prehistoric humans were not rooted to one place. They moved with the seasons, followed the herds, and crossed vast distances in search of safety. These migrations shaped the spread of humanity across continents, carrying cultures, languages, and ideas to new lands. Migration was not an act of luxury, but a survival, a testament to human determination to seek life wherever it might be found. In the modern world, migration continues for many, driven by conflict, climate change, or opportunity. The Ice Age teaches us that movement is part of our story, and resilience often requires leaving behind the familiar for the unknown. Even art and imagination carry forward the Ice Age's influence. The cave paintings of Lascaux or Chauvet, the carved figurines, the rhythmic drumming around fires. These were not mere diversions. They were acts of meaning, making in a world that could feel senselessly cruel. By painting animals on stone walls, humans celebrated life and imposed order on chaos. By singing and storytelling, they lifted spirits and united communities. Today, we continue this legacy in our films, books, and songs. Art remains our way of processing hardship, celebrating survival, and envisioning futures beyond the cold. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that survival is not enough. Our ancestors did not simply endure the Ice Age. They grew, learned, and passed on knowledge. They sought meaning in their struggle, turning survival into story, hardship into ritual, and death into legacy. From them we inherit not only stronger bodies, but also richer minds and deeper cultures. Their endurance ensured that we could live not in caves, but in cities, not by firelight alone, but under electric stars. The comforts of the modern world are built upon their courage, their suffering, and their refusal to surrender. The Ice Age stands as a reminder that humanity has always been tested and always will be. Each generation faces its own kind of winter, its own trials of survival and spirit. But the story of prehistoric humans assures us that we carry within us the same fire they once kept alive in dark caves. That fire is ingenuity, community, resilience, and hope. It is the unbroken thread that connects us to the past and guides us toward the future. In the end, the legacy of the Ice Age is not about glaciers or mammoths or stone tools. It is about the enduring human spirit. It is about a species that, though fragile in body, proved unbreakable in will. It is about us. Their story is our story, and their lessons are ours to keep. The Ice Age may have ended, but its memory lingers as a guide, that no matter how cold the night, the human spirit burns brighter, and no matter how endless the winter, spring will come